soul be rekindled with fire from above, revive us again. Oh, that's such a powerful thought, a powerful example for us. We need that revival. We need that reminder for why we're here, why we are able to stand in the midst of a world that is not able to stand. And this evening, and we're going to be looking in Matthew chapter 5. If you'll turn there, and actually, it's not, let's see, Matthew 5, it's Matthew 6:19. I realized I just saw chapter 5 up there. Chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. Mentioned that this morning, that we would be looking at where our treasure is, there our heart will be also, from the perspective of the thieves on the cross. And so I would like for us to think of this question by looking to them. I'm going to read verses 19 through 21. It says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So when we look at this first part, he's saying, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. We recognize that the treasures that we have, that they will be destroyed. I remember finding one of the best yard sale finds ever for $10, a 1963 Western Flyer bicycle. And it still had the chrome on it. It had been set in a garage, and so we had a garage in Ohio, and I thought, hey, this is great. I restored the thing, I found a vintage seat for it for my sons on the back. I even built a little tandem bicycle handlebars for Gabriel and James, and they could ride on the back with me. And so then we moved here, and we moved to a 2-bedroom, 1-bath without a garage so that I wouldn't be distracted. And so we still have that bicycle. And I put it on the back of the porch under there, and I noticed yesterday that some of that chrome is gone, and what has been replaced? What's been replaced with? Rust. It's going to happen, isn't it? Hey, it's $10. That doesn't matter. But when you look at it, you see, hey, this is great. This is something that we love to have these treasures, but they can deteriorate. Well, that's one thing. Well, we understand that destroys, but thieves breaking in and stealing. When I think about a thief breaking in and stealing, I can't think of a better example for telling me where my treasure needs to be than when a thief breaks in and steals. I remember when Mary and I were living overseas, my dad had my truck, and his car didn't have any gas in it, and so he drove my truck to the office that morning, and Mom didn't know about it, but the car was, he left his car in the garage down. As he went to pull out, somebody, unbeknownst to him, went into the back window and broke in, and they took the TV, they took all sorts of things, put it in the back of Dad's car, got his key, somehow found it in the kitchen, and drove it out of the garage. And they took everything. And then when it ran out of gas, they sent it down a ravine. He had just paid it off the week before. Isn't that how it goes? And I remember hearing about this, and oh man, and we were 4,500 miles away, and I was like, Dad, I'm so sorry. This is terrible. Well, my mom gets home, and she wasn't expecting. She had no idea that the biggest thing had been gone was the car. But the thing is, she sees, and my mother is a New Zealander, and so she gets on the phone, and she calls 911, and she says, "We've been burgled, we've been burgled." And he says, "You've been burgered? What do you mean?" And so I'll never forget that, and we have had such a joke ever since. We've been burgled, we've been burgered, And so when you think about this, though, at the end of the day, where is our treasure? The treasure that we have can go away. And so when we're going to be discussing is a treasure that cannot be burgled, cannot be taken away. Because he says, "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves break in and steal." Winter came, and I'll tell you, one thing that I love is getting some of my New Zealand wool out during the winter, and I'm not able to really wear wool very much. And so I grab my wool sweater, and it's one of my favorite things to do. Well, I noticed this year that there were a couple holes I have a cashmere sweater that was given to me, and there were a couple holes because a moth got in there. So we see that things that we treasure, things that we love, they can be destroyed or they can be stolen. But when our treasure is in a place that it cannot be stolen, it cannot be destroyed, then we're not going to struggle with these things. I like to look at John chapter 10 and verse 1 beginning. John 10, and we're going to go verses 1 through 10 to set the stage for the concept of a thief breaking in and stealing. Verse 1 says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber." I know when my parents read that verse, they're reminded of a window. But verse 2, it says, "But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. And all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly." This evening we're going to be looking at two thieves in Luke chapter 23. If you'll turn there with me. Luke 23. We understand that these two thieves, we understand that they are thieves based on Matthew's account, but we're going to look at verse 23. Luke 23. And we're going to begin in verse 32. And Luke gives that they are criminals. But look at verse 32. It says, "Two others who were criminals, thieves, were led away to be put to death with Jesus. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left." You know, it's almost poetic that Jesus would have two thieves on his right and on his left. Because when Jesus came to this world, he was surrounded by individuals who thought that the kingdom was earthly. That they thought that their kingdom was based on what this earth had to provide. Well, I find it interesting, this is something that must be important, that when we see a thieves break in and steal, the word for break in and steal can also mean dig through and steal. So let's put that in perspective. So during this time, they're putting treasure literally in earth. It can be dig through and steal. Think about a thief can use a shovel and get into your home. That's a pretty interesting. I know it wasn't specifically a shovel, but you're talking about more of an adobe type, mud house. And if this was an issue for them then, is it not going to be an issue for us now, even more so? Because we have a lot of wonderful things. We have a lot of wonderful treasures in this life. And he is surrounded by two men who made a life out of other people's treasures. They laid up for themselves other people's treasures on earth. And that's what they did with their life. And I find it interesting that Jesus he has these two men next to him. And we're going to see that these two men are seeking another treasure yet again. Look at verse 39. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." This is his final attempt at freedom. He's grasping at straws here. He's saying, "Hey, Are you the Christ? Save yourself and us. He could easily be thinking about some treasure that he has had stored away. That he has when he dug through and he stole, and maybe he went and buried it and he's got it somewhere. And this is his last-ditch effort where he can go and he can find that treasure. He's trying to manipulate Christ. You see, when you think this, are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. Almost sounds like he believes. But he's not. He's not putting Christ first. He's still putting himself first. And so we've got to recognize that we can be like this thief. That we can be like this person, that we can say that we believe in Christ, but if we put our treasure elsewhere, our heart is very much far from Jesus. We do not want to be this individual. Now, I like to look at verse 40. Let's look at this other thief. Look at how he responds to Jesus. How he responds to this other thief. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? What does this show about this thief? It shows that he feared God. In his final moments, he fears God. We understand that he was a thief just like the other, that's what brought him to that very point. And yet in his final moments, he fears God and rebukes his fellow thief. And he says, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, verse 41, and we indeed justly, for we're receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. So notice in the second place, not only did he fear God, but he was humble and just. He recognized that justice was being served to himself and to his comrade, his fellow thief, but it wasn't being served to Jesus. Because he says, this man has done nothing wrong. He believed, in the third place, in Jesus' innocence. And so, in his final moments, he's no longer laying up treasures on earth, but he is laying up treasures in heaven, where he recognizes that moth and rust do not destroy, and thieves do not dig through and steal. You see, no matter what this thief, the first thief, was trying to do, all that he could to get off of that cross, he was nailed there. He couldn't get down. And this other thief recognizes, I can't get off this cross. And he recognizes, finally, that he fears God. He has a sense of innocence concerning Jesus and humility toward him. But look at verse 42. What does he say to Jesus? And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. In the fourth place, he believed that Jesus was Lord. And notice it's interesting because the other says, are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. This wasn't based on belief in Jesus. This was based on that last-ditch effort. This possibility that maybe he'll get us down. No, this other man he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. This is amazing. That a man who used to steal in order to survive now recognizes that the kingdom that Jesus is going to is not earthly. That's amazing because after the resurrection, we understand in Acts chapter 1, and when Jesus has already spoken for 40 days about the kingdom, the apostles said, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? You see, even the apostles didn't recognize, but this man does. Look at verse 43. And he said to him, truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. I think it's important to recognize what was today. When Jesus says this, he's still under the old law. So we recognize when Jesus says this, and we know that in Matthew chapter 28, you see, there are a lot of misunderstandings around this passage. In Matthew 28 and verse 18, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. So Jesus, with His authority, commands the apostles. So we have to recognize that this is after the resurrection. Jesus has all the authority. And Jesus can make this authoritative move to say to this man, today you'll be with me in paradise. But this is unique. This is not something that you and I can experience today. And so often some will say, well, Jesus brought the thief into the thief on the cross into paradise. He can bring us. Well, we have to follow what Jesus has taught. And we understand that He is the door. And I find it amazing that this man who was justly placed on a cross as a thief finally decided to knock this time. He finally decided to knock. Jesus, remember me today in your kingdom. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus, we understand, He says, ask and you receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. So even a thief on the cross recognized this and he was willing to knock after, and that's changing his spots. That's changing the way that he had lived his life, and that's why that's what Jesus does when we are in His presence. He causes us to change. And so we're told to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you will, turn to Psalm chapter 37, and we're going to look at verse 3. It says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. If your treasure is in the Lord, if you delight yourself in the Lord, He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. So what we're seeing in this passage is so important because this cannot be taken from you. This cannot be destroyed. It cannot be stolen. If you will, turn to James chapter 5. James 5, and we're going to look at verse 1. Verses 1 through 3 says, come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted. Your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. And so when he's talking to the rich, he's talking to individuals who are characterized by their riches. They're defined by their stuff, by their things. And he tells them to weep and howl because they've laid up treasure in the last days. You know, if we do this, if we've got to recognize that we're in the last days now. That if we're storing up treasures that are on this earth, it's going to come and end. I mean, how many times have we seen, when I went to that yard sale in that 1963 Western Flyer sat there and it was in just such great shape for $10. It had been set in a garage because someone had held on to that. But they were no longer there. But there was that bicycle. You see, we're not going to outlive our things. And someone else is going to have to deal with them. And so, to me, it's also a reminder of just how limited we are when we see the stuff that's just heaped up as a collection for someone else. We can read all through Ecclesiastes, and Solomon saw that as vanity. But notice verse 8 of James chapter 5. It says, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. The judge is standing at the door, but the judge is also the door for us if we apply this to John chapter 10. And He is giving us access. He's granting us access into heaven. But we can't take the stuff with us. And so I'd like to look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, and the lesson will be yours. Verse 1 says, "Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness." This evening, where are you storing up or laying up your treasure? If your treasure is on this earth, then one day, what this is saying is, Jesus is going to return on that specific day. And you're going to be taken from your treasure because you cannot take it with you. But if you are storing up your treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy and thieves cannot burgle, they cannot break in and dig through and steal, then you're going to be taken from this life to your treasure. Isn't that a powerful thought? Because we do not know when Jesus is going to return. And we must recognize that we've got to put our trust in Him. We have to obey Him. We're told, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. If we are to fill our lives with things that are earthly, it's going to lead us to sin. We've got to recognize we have to get rid of that from our lives. We've got to make sure that we're not putting our trust in those things that can be taken away from us. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. My question for you tonight is, where is your heart? Do you need that revival that we sang about before we began tonight? This invitation is for you to make sure that your life is in line with this treasure. That your life is in a place that is secure, that will never pass away. And in doing that, making sure you're going to confess that Jesus is Lord and be baptized for forgiveness of your sins. Maybe you're here tonight and you've made that decision. You have become a Christian, but you've allowed things to get in the way. What needs to change? Are you willing to make that change tonight? Won't you come? All together we stand.